So, The Bikeriders is a semi-biographical film about bike riders, well, more precisely, biker gangs of the 1960s and going a little bit more into like the 1970s as well. It's directed by Jeff Nichols. And the thing about Bikeriders is that I don't quite want to say it's kind of like a Linklater film where it's just kind of more like you just hanging out with the characters, but honestly, it kind of is that at times, because the biggest complaint that I know a lot of people are going to have about this film is that it meanders too much. Like it goes all over the place. It doesn't stick too closely with any characters, and some characters just kind of phase in and out, and it just kind of jumps from like event to event while trying to explore the ins and outs of this biker gang. But honestly, I kind of dug this because like the thing is, like, I feel like having that setup gives enough room for a lot of these actors, and there are a lot of good actors in this. It gives them moments to shine in little bits and pieces here, which might frustrate some people because, like, even though like there is like a bit of a core story about this Chicago biker gang kind of like losing their edge and their grasp on what it is to be in a biker gang over the years, it kind of goes in many different directions. It doesn't make it so simple to understand. But like I said, the real draw here is just the performances, and what really anchors the film, I think, is Jodie Comer's performance as Kathy, who's basically the wife of a biker, and she is kind of like the framing device here because she's being interviewed by Danny Lyon, played by Mike Faist, about what it is to, you know, be married and be attracted to these bikers. And let me tell you, like, Comer's, like, this is a stacked cast in this film, and Comer's performance is definitely the highlight. Mostly because she just, like, leans in to that, like, Midwest accent. And it's like, it's equal parts, like charming and believable, where you're kind of, like, hanging on her words. Because she kind of has, like, that way of just kind of, like, explaining herself while she's, you know, doing something else. Because, like, every time she's speaking with Danny, she's always doing something. Like she's either, you know, she's in the kitchen, or, you know, she's doing laundry at the laundromat, and she just like has this firm grasp where it almost feels like not so much she's relaying a story as much as she's just kind of like gossiping the way that she does with the other wives. And I think like that's a great angle to approach it from, because then it makes this kind of like almost like scattershot story make more sense from like the perspective of like of a journalist who's tracking it down. Because like I said, the cast here is all great for who they explore here. Like Kathy ends up being married to Benny, played by Austin Butler, who Butler does a pretty good job kind of just playing that kind of like, you know, too cool to talk that much type of biker. And embodying that kind of like, you know, cool and quiet type of guy who does have a little bit of a creepy side. Like like when he's initially interested in Kathy, he just kind of stares at her. In fact, he just kind of like hangs out at her place the whole. And when I say hang out, I mean like he's like across the street, just on his motorcycle, just hanging out in front of her place. So he kind of has that creepy angle to him, but he's also, you know, they show that he's determined about like being committed to the biker lifestyle. Despite, you know, the pleas of Kathy and like the fights that he gets into and stuff like that, he just embraces this lifestyle. And he embraces it alongside Johnny, played by Tom Hardy, who is kind of more or less like the leader of this biker gang. And Tom Hardy, he puts on like a little bit of like an accent here that borders on comical, but I think it works for this type of film because it is very critical, I think, of how like these early biker gangs tried to define themselves, because they highlight that Johnny is not quite like all that astute on gang etiquette. Like they show him like trying to emulate, you know, like he's watching like a Marlon Brando film, like all these motorcycle movies on television, and just saying, yeah, we got to do that. That's what we got to do. And just tries to embrace it in like this kind of like business sense. when realizing that, oh, what do we gotta do? Well, we gotta show how tough we are. If someone challenges my leadership, we gotta have a fight. But also they show how he's like a little bit of like a pushover, like he's just trying to act tough and put up that front. Like at one point, someone in the gang challenges him about having a Wisconsin chapter of their gang. And Johnny is just like, well, I don't think we're going to do that. If you want to do it, we're going to have a fight for it. What do you want, fists or knives? And so they have a fist fight, and even though Johnny wins and he kind of, it looks like it kind of bends back some fingers there, Johnny's still like, yeah, sure, you can have the Wisconsin chapter. I'm just trying to look tough. So they do kind of pull back a little bit of the veneer on these characters. But I think that they do it in a way that feels genuine, where it's not just trying to be like a straight up satire of biker gangs. I feel like it is trying to tap into something, but also be very critical of how these gangs came to be. And the more genuine aspect, I think, is more explored with the other characters who are thrown into the mix. Like you have Michael Shannon playing Zipco, who's a character who has very interesting opinions on calling people like pinkos and commies, which Danny thankfully takes a good interest in. It's like, well, what do you mean by like pinko and commie? And Zipco kind of just gives this roundabout way of saying, like, well, it's just, people who go off to college and they get educated and stuff like that. So it's kind of interesting to get that perspective. And then you have probably a character who could just slip into this film with ease and does, is Norman Reedus playing this California gang member called Funny Sonny. And he just slips in. Like, he just comes into town, just hangs out with the gang, saying like, hey, I'm hanging with you. And like the way that like Norman Reedus, like he doesn't just slap on some leather and grow a beard. Like he goes hard into this role. And it just works. And I think that works for like a lot of the other actors here, like with like Boyd Holbrook and Damon Harriman as all the other members. They're really good in this film, and I think it's just because like they have this ease to how they become part of like this gang. And I also love the dynamic that they have between them. Like I love the fact that at one point when they do get approached by a rival gang, Johnny's like kind of approached them like all business, and Benny just kind of comes in charge. He doesn't even say anything. He just comes in and punches one of them to get like their big biker skirmish going, realizing that that's the way that this is going to work. And it's one of those things where there are rules to the gang, but they're not really rules. Like they're loose rules. And I love the way how Johnny kind of tries to semi-maintain this level of of an organized gang, and just kind of like slowly lose more control of it as more of these like aggressive members come in, and whatever like kind of like mild rebelliousness they might have had before just becomes like full-blown violent, and characters doing executions, and just Benny and Johnny realizing that they've lost control of this gang. Like there's nothing they can do at this point. And it's like I said, it's all over the place, but it's got great performances. Like like Hardy is like kind of playing it up, but I think it works here because, like I said, it's being critical of this stuff, and I think it works in exploring just enough of more with like nuance, like the shades of masculinity that gets associated with these biker gangs and how they operated. And I feel like that's a much more interesting angle to explore than just doing like a straight adaptation of because the film is based on a book by Danny Lyon, like the real life photojournalist who did cover these bikers. And I feel like it's more interesting to do with this from like kind of like this fictional perspective that's more about trying to find like the atmosphere and the underlying emotions that come with forming a biker gang, rather than just making like like an astute observation, not quite astute, more or less like an accurate representation of what was covered in the book. Because I feel like this is probably the best way to cover the stuff from the book, because I think it becomes more about the themes of men wanting to assemble a biker gang and how they kind of establish their own rules and how those rules don't really stick, I think that's more important than just like, nailing who these bikers were, and how the events happened, chronologically correct. Because like I said, they do jump around in time here from like the 60s to the 70s, and there's some pretty hard jumps here and there. The Bikeriders, it's a bit all over the place, but it feels like a Linklater film. And with the cast they have assembled here, they touch into some interesting aspects that are a little bit more subtle, and I think it works when they're coming out of Jodie Comer's Midwestern mouth of like trying to relay the experience of, what it was being like around these bike riders and trying to tap in just a little bit inside their minds rather than just like crack open the whole shell here. And I think it's a very enticing angle to go from, because like you still get those moments of like biker fights and, them, having, rows with like the local police force and, getting into bar fights and establishing boundaries and deciding who gets in and who gets out and how that creates more friction within the gang. Those are the moments that I think are the most powerful and that they're thankfully explored the most here, where it feels like this could be a much longer film with like a bunch of like needless exposition, and it feels like it's diced up here just well enough where it's more about like the vibe of what it's like to be with on like this biker gang, and for the most part kind of works.